I'm going to turn it over to our VP of Product Management, David Cramer.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Hey, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Good, because I can barely hear myself. Apologize, I was just running over here from the other side, so I'm a little out of breath, but my name is David Cramer. I run product management in the app delivery BU, and I'm going to talk a little bit about continuous delivery today. So, got a few slides. I'll try and keep it interactive, and if you guys have questions, please feel free to raise hands, interrupt me as we go. And perfect. We'll skip that one. First one is just a quick question. We did this poll not too long ago, and we found out something very, very interesting. Do you believe your organization has achieved continuous delivery? I thought it was very, very interesting that 27% of the people we talked to said yes. Most of the customers I talked to are trying to figure out what continuous delivery actually is, so I thought it was real interesting that most people said yes. Or 27% said yes for some projects, 14% said yes altogether, and only 60% said no. I would have figured it would have been more like 80 or 90% said no, we're not there yet. So one of the questions that a lot of people ask me is, well, where did this continuous delivery idea come from? What are we really trying to do with continuous delivery? You know, some people would look at it and say it's a product or a thing. I think of it more of a philosophy or an approach. And if you actually look at some of the logos up here, most of these companies didn't start their businesses or start the process and say, I want to define continuous delivery and I want to define a new way to deliver software faster. They did it because they had to. Their business models required it. So one of the common trends here is these are all web scale IT. These are all web forward companies who had to learn how to rapidly deploy software in order to maintain their competitive advantage. And as you guys have heard throughout the sessions, that's a big theme in the application economy. More and more companies are either driving revenues or touching customers with applications. And so they see things like the way Netflix does canary deployments and rolls out software, the way Facebook rolls out software and checks in code every single day into production. In fact, one of the Facebook things that I think is really interesting is their culture is built around this idea. So one of the things they do, if you're a new developer at Facebook, on day one, you are required to check code into the production system. Now, partly they're doing it to see if you've got the brass to actually do that and check code in. And in part, they're also testing you to see if you can work in the environment that they've created. But what's happening is all of these companies, because of the business models, they figured out ways to speed software delivery so that the old model of 6, 9, 12-month deployment cycles and customers kind of being caught in the middle disappeared. You know, I'm not a big Facebook user, but I love the story that at any one given point in time, there's about 13 versions of Facebook running on their infrastructure. So some of us may see the thumbs up, thumbs down feature because we logged into servers that had gotten the most recent patch. Some of us may not have that capability because we're working on a different set of systems. So it's just a new and advanced way to deploy software, and a lot of it has come from the work that these companies have done. Now, one of the key themes I always hear is that's not my peer group. You know, I work for an insurance company or a bank, or, you know, I don't work for a web forward company in San Francisco. I'm not streaming media. That's not my business. Well, I think my message back is I understand that a lot of the things that these guys do is based on the fact that they had one platform and that maybe that platform was built in the last 5 years and maybe it was designed to run in a cloud. So certainly there's some challenges that an enterprise is going to face that a company like Netflix or Facebook maybe doesn't face. But that doesn't mean that there are not some really interesting nuggets, some really interesting tips and tricks and techniques that we can all learn to speed up application delivery based on what these guys are doing. So let's talk a little bit more about what's happening in this market. This is from the Puppet Labs. Puppet's a big open source configuration and infrastructure tool. And this is from their State of the DevOps report. And I thought it was really interesting that what they were trying to show is that the teams who deploy code more quickly are the more valuable teams to their companies. They have fewer failures and typically much, much higher quality, but not just quality, but higher cycle times. And in the past, that's always been a problem. The choice has been, I can either go fast, and it's going to be pretty buggy and a lot of errors, but we're going to go fast, or I can go slow, and it's going to cost you a little bit more, but it'll be error-free, and we're going to go slow. And what the Puppet guys found is the guys who do this best are going fast, and they're doing it with high quality. And that's a big part of what the application delivery business unit was built around. If you combine the acquisition of Nolio and ITKO, and you look at the message that both of those companies portrayed, it was going fast with higher quality. And that's a big part of what we are trying to help you guys do. So again, another Puppet Lab survey. Firms that had high-performing applications, guess what? They were likely to exceed profitability, they were growing market share, they were growing productivity. I'll grant you that this one's a little bit of a stretch, but I love what they're trying to show, because I think that one of the fundamental things that we see is a culture of shared ownership. Crucial part of speeding up application release, getting to continuous delivery, is creating that culture of shared ownership in your organization. I can't tell you the number of customers who ask me the question, how do I make it work in my organization? And then after you spend a little time with them, you say, well, you need to change your organization. There's some cultural things that no tool or no approach are going to solve. And so I like this quote, because I think Puppet's trying to maybe kind of politely show that the guys who get it don't just get it in speeding up application release, but they get it across the company, and they really do build a culture of shared ownership inside the company. All right, so let's talk about a few of the challenges. I mentioned a couple of them, but one of them is this concept that you can just build a tool chain. It sounds real easy. Yeah, just stitch all the tools that the application teams, the test teams, the infrastructure teams, the security teams, just stitch them all together and you'll have your tool chain and you'll be up and running in no time. Oh, but we've got tens of hundreds of thousands of servers in our environments that have to be configured. Different tools for a lot of that. We've got different application components, middleware components, databases, and other platforms. We've actually got a lot of nuance within the applications themselves, where the artifacts are stored, how they're architected, and maybe most importantly, I've got multiple teams spread across multiple geographies trying to do multiple releases every day, every week, every month. This is a huge challenge. Again, if we go back to some of the companies that kind of pioneered this space, what do you see? You see smaller, you see startup, you see newer, and they were able to do it because they didn't have to face some of these challenges. Now, certainly as they've grown, I mean, Facebook's a huge organization, so is Netflix. So we know that they're facing these challenges now, but it is different when you're facing them after you've solved your problems versus while you're trying to solve them. So this idea of just building a continuous delivery tool chain is pretty challenging. Very challenging for the largest of organizations, because each team in most cases has picked a specific set of tools to do their job. And so you can't walk in and say, here's the one DevOps product, throw everything else you're using away because this solves all your problems. You lose credibility with your team if you say that. The story has to be, we'll work with the existing tools that you have in place, because otherwise it's going to create too much upheaval and the organization won't be able to function, trying to speed up the release, trying to automate parts of the release, and trying to roll out a whole bunch of new tools into the org. That's a challenge, a big challenge. Another big challenge is just the competing priorities. IT, for as long as we can remember, is focused on risk mitigation, change reviews. We don't just change things, we have to review things, assess their impact, and determine if the change is approved. So you've got a group of people who, for the better part of their adult life, have been managing risk and trying to standardize and make consistent the environment. And why are they doing that? No, it's not to just be jerks and make the life of the application guy hard. It's because it reduces risk. It reduces the configuration change problems. It reduces downtime. However, on the other side of the equation, you've got a bunch of developers and testers. And guess what they've been being told for the last 15 or 20 years? Speed up, use Agile, use new programming techniques, go fast, try new things out, innovate. So you've got innovation and speed hitting risk management and no change. And so that's a real cultural challenge. Second thing, business-focused teams versus technology-focused teams. Another real common problem I see is that there are so few teams who are oriented around delivering the business service, and so many teams who are oriented around keeping the technology up. I'm the database guy, I'm the security guy, I'm the network gal, I'm the Unix, I'm the Linux. And so a lot of the challenges come with breaking down some of those old silos and those more technically oriented teams and turning them towards a more business oriented. And then last, I talked a little bit about it, but it's one thing to do this at a startup with 30 guys. It's another thing to do this with 500 people spread across 4 offices who are working different hours and maybe even have some language or cultural challenges. So when you talk about doing this at scale at the enterprise, there's some new challenges. There's some interesting things you've got to focus on. So when we talk about the best practices and the ways to solve this, one of the first things, and this isn't just CA, read any book about continuous delivery, read any popular article about DevOps, and they talk about automate as much as you can, because they realize 2 things. Number one, when you automate it, you get more consistent results, so less errors, so that translates into higher quality, and typically, when you automate, you can go a little bit faster than when you're doing it manually. So when we talk about automation, first thing that I always tell customers to start with is release planning. This isn't a discipline that a lot of companies have invested in because more often than not, they weren't as worried about the releasing of software. It was just one of the functions that happened, and the developers, or maybe the testers, or maybe the production guys kind of figured it out. They just did it. What we're seeing in some of our most mature companies is this is a new discipline. This is something that they are taking very seriously because they've got a pipeline, hundreds of applications that need to go out the door. Some of them drive revenue. Some of them are customer facing. Some of them are internal and maybe not quite as important, but all of them are competing. They're competing for cycle time in the environments. You know, think about the performance lab. That's typically a place where there's a lot of contention. Hey, I need to test my app for performance. We've only got one performance lab, and guess what? It's only available next month. So I've got to wait a month because the resources aren't available. Or I need some complex system to be included in my integration testing, and I'm not going to get access to that system until next Friday night from 2 in the morning till 4 in the morning. So I guess I'm, working late that night. So there's a lot of scheduling challenges and a lot of planning issues that customers aren't aware of, and I think that's one of the reasons to focus on this area. But the second is the bottom point. If you do release planning correctly, one of the things that naturally comes out of this is your KPIs. What are you actually measuring? Is it cost? Are you trying to lower the cost of release? Is it speed? Are you trying to increase the number of releases that go out the door? Is it some other variable? Maybe it's a combination of 3 or 4 metrics. When you start planning releases and prioritizing the promotion path that your releases go through, inevitably, you're going to get a dashboard full of key indicators so that you can get the pulse and say, wow, we're doing really, really well this month, or wow, compared to last month, we're not doing well at all. So this is a huge, huge area of importance, and an area I see a lot of companies not focused on. Second area of importance, let me build this one out, and there. The second area is this promotion path. So far too many people think of release automation and think of continuous delivery as I take the build from my Jenkins or my TFS or my CI system and I deploy it. And that's release automation, and I've automated the release and I'm done. Well, that's a developer's view of the world, but it's certainly not what the guys in the test and QA and downstream and production think, because they know that you have to automate across the whole path. It's not just getting into the dev environment, it's once the developers are finished, let's migrate it over into integration or performance or acceptance or one of the testing environments. Once we've passed those tests and gotten the right approvals, let's promote it into production. So when we talk about automating the entire promotion path, this is a really, really big idea and a really important idea. And this is what the companies who are really cranking software out quickly, this is what they're doing. They're automating almost the entire process so that human intervention shows up only when it's needed to either do a review and approve something or identify why an error or a performance condition exists. And they've stepped away from having humans manually configure boxes, manually grab and move artifact packages, manually check logs, right? The automation takes care of a lot of this for you. And so what we talk about here is the idea that you can move from a pretty manual process to a process that in some cases could be 0 touch or 1 touch. Push the button to automate, or in a lot of our customer cases, they start the automation when the release candidate comes out of the build system. So some companies do it with nightly builds. Some companies do it every code check-in. Code gets checked in, CI system cranks out a new release candidate, automation automatically triggers from that moment, no human interaction needed. We bring it in, we set up the dev environments. Once those tests have passed, we move it to the next phase of the process. So the possibility to do end-to-end automation is real. And we've got some customers who do that. Orchestration and the promotion path. So we talk about this beautiful world where you can automate the whole promotion path, and those of you who actually do this for a living or live in the trenches, so to speak, are probably thinking, well, how the heck do I do that? Because my Java teams use these 4 or 5 tools, and when we have this application, we need this special environment, and oh, by the way, we use a service desk for these kind of approvals, but if there's incident requests, we have a separate system. Some teams use Jira for issues, some teams use Bugzilla. So one of the problems that people have is as you go across the path, there's a lot of tools and a lot of different tools that you have to handle. And so the way we approach this is through an integration framework. Because as I said earlier, if you walk into a team today and tell them the answer is throw out the tools you use and buy this new thing, most of them are going to throw you out because they're going to say that's not realistic. It's going to kill my business and slow me down. So the way you do this is you integrate to the key components that each team is using, and you use a standard process flow. So I always have this analogy of the pre-flight checklist that the airlines do. So we all hope that when you get on the plane, they've done the pre-flight checklist. Now, I'm no pilot, but I think they check a lot of the same stuff. Do we have enough gas to get there? Did we file a flight plan? Do we have a guy to fly the plane? Did we shut the doors? Is all the luggage in? I mean, there's a basic set of things that you hope every airline is checking before they take off. However, there's also some nuance. Hey, this is one of those brand new Boeing Dreamliners. I heard the battery blows up and catches on fire. Maybe we ought to check that. Hey, this is a really old McDonnell Douglas airplane. They don't even have the batteries in that Boeing, so we don't need to check that. So our approach is to reuse standard processes as often as possible and then plug in the tools or the steps necessary based on the technology. So your Java team, there's going to be a bunch of Java tools. Your .NET team, they're probably going to use a different set of tools, .NET tools. You may have some companies or some teams that are all open source and they just want to use all the open tools, and you may have other teams that are all commercial tools. The idea is you could have a pre-flight checklist that would pattern match to all of them, and what you do is you let them plug in the tool of choice, and we do this via something called action packs. I won't describe them, but if you're interested, we've got a booth over here that shows how we build action packs. I think we've got about 125 of them today, covering most of the major ALM, infrastructure, DevOps-y kind of tools. So orchestration is a huge part. You can't just automate one piece. You've got to orchestrate all the way across the process. And so what does success look like? I'm going to wrap up here, and I've changed the names to protect the innocent, so to speak, but this is one of our customers, major healthcare organization. You can see here the business, multiple releases across multiple environments. And in fact, I know this specific customer, one of the things that they were under pressure to do was to use the Microsoft Azure cloud. Because the company said, look, we're spending too much money on environments and we're a big Microsoft shop, why aren't we using this thing? And of course the release team said, because we're not ready, because we don't know how. But you can see one of the key things that I take away is down at the bottom. The actual team was viewed as an impediment. No one wanted to work with them. They were the slow you down team. They were the team that didn't add value. They weren't part of the core application development and test team. Why would we go let them release our software? We can just write a couple of scripts and release it ourselves. Well, here's what happened. Because they were running into problems, config problems, cost problems, and consistency problems. So here's what happened. And it's really, really interesting to see. And the one thing that I like the most is the headcount reduction. They were able to take a team of 15 people who were unliked. As I said, this was not a team of people who were in demand. They were having to sell their service inside the company and no one wanted to use it. now the service is going through the roof and they only need one person to run it, so the other 14 people were moved on to other projects so that they didn't have to do this job anymore. And I think that if you ask the guys who work at this company, they'd tell you that was the single biggest shift, because they weren't being given more budget. They weren't being told, hey, go hire a bunch of new people, but by freeing up these resources, they were able to tackle some new projects without having to go up the food chain and ask for budget relief or new hires. Second thing I think that's great is that they increased their number of weekly deployments by 300%. You know, it's a good number. Obviously, you want to see the before and after. Is that from 1 to 3, or is that from 1,000 to 3,000? I can tell you it's not from 1 to 3. It's a good bit more than that. Last but not least, and this is where I started, culture of shared ownership, collaboration between your teams and breaking down silos. One of the things that's really, really fun to go visit this customer and see is that the developers have done a 180 and they are embracing this team, and they're very, very excited about the work that this team did. And there's trust. There's trust between the stakeholders, and there's visibility. They've got a dashboard that they all look at, the same metrics. So when the developers push out code that's a little buggy, it's not a surprise to anybody. The developers know, hey, the code was a little buggy, we got to go back and fix it. When the environments team was a little bit slow to get the environment ready, hey, everybody knows, hey, the environments team took an extra day. There's not a lot of finger pointing at this company anymore, because they can all see it and they can all identify where the bottleneck in the process is and how they want to fix it. So with that, I'll finish up and suggest a few sessions that I think you guys should go see. One is Molina. They're going to do a session at 3:30 on the 10th today. Then we've got our own GIS department. So inside CA, we call our IT department is called GIS, Global Information Services. One of the really cool things that this team did is they took my product and they used it to speed up their deployments of Salesforce. Now, when I first heard this, I actually laughed. I was like, wait a minute, Salesforce, that's SaaS, that's software as a service. What are they deploying? Then I went down and learned how hard it is to keep a highly customized Salesforce system up and running, and how much money we were spending at CA to do it, and how much money we were able to save our company just using this tool to speed up the releases. So we've got a booth over there that shows that, and one of the guys from our GIS department is actually going to walk through. So if there's anybody who's a Salesforce admin or interested in Salesforce automation, great session. And then the last one is around the action packs and plugins. I talked about how we do orchestration and how important that is. This is a session that'll get into the details of how those action packs get created, what we cover today, and how you guys as customers or partners of CA could build your own and contribute them to our community. So with that, I'll wrap up. All right, well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.